Hi people, welcome back to the Grit and Growth podcast. Today we've got Sam Fryer with us. As you know, the ones who keep tuning in, this is all about mindset, business and everything in between. So as I said, we've got Sam Fryer. Sam's actually a good friend of mine. I've known Sam for some time now, and that's why I wanted him on this podcast, because I find what he's done with his career really, really impressive. So I wanted him to share some of that, but also go through some of the key mindsets and drive it takes to get to his level, and all the bits in between again. So Sam, I'll let you introduce yourself. Give us a bit of a backstory about you, really.
Yeah, so I don't know where to start, but I mean, I guess I did all the traditional things like, university and everything else, and I lived on the island, as you know, for a while. I moved off and I went to Exeter Uni, and then I kind of started my career, like most people do. Yeah, and in my career, I started in software, more of a services-related software, and then I moved through my career. It wasn't probably until 7 or 8 years ago where I'd say I found my home.
Yeah.
And in that, I've now built, for the last 7 years, a career where I moved through the sales organization into a senior sales executive, essentially, which is what is known as Chief Revenue Officer. I was part of the founding team that we as a group sold that business to a private equity firm. I stayed on with that business for 2 years.
Yep.
And I recently stepped away in early March this year to be an advisor, work with the commercial organization, and I've since been taking on coaching clients, and I've co-founded some other software businesses. So yeah, I've spent 10 years in software, I'd say.
Is there a niche in software, or is it all parts of software, tech, SaaS?
That's a good question. Predominantly SaaS, so software as a service.
Yeah.
But most of the businesses I work with or work for are software products, so software-led with services wrapped around. So what that basically means, in short, is the main offering that we go to market with is a software product of some form. So you could think of anything you use on your computer on a daily basis, any general software, right? Like Microsoft has tons of software, right? Yeah, you use all their apps and emails and things, but then we wrap services around that to support people using the software.
And actually, I've just reminded myself, obviously I know what SaaS means, but I think people probably actually get confused between what SaaS, tech, software. You obviously already mentioned software as a service. So the simplified version of SaaS, what is SaaS?
SaaS is essentially, as described, it's software as a service, right? So basically what you're doing is we're not giving you software that you then own the intellectual property of, and you don't own it.
Okay.
What you do is we have it, we build it, we maintain the rights to own it.
Okay.
We are allowing you to use it for what is known as a subscription fee. So it's what you pay us on a monthly, yearly basis to get the rights to use my software, but I'm not transferring that software to you to own.
Bit like I'm simplifying it for people because, like I said, I know what SaaS meant, but I'm aware some people don't know the difference between all these things. Bit like a subscription model of such. If you're going to go outside the technology world,
yeah,
that sort of format. If I'm going to then sell affiliate program or subscription model, so that type of thing for technology.
Yeah, exactly that. And you get different models like, work for hire, where people will pay typically like a consultant.
Yeah.
Where you'll pay a consultant to come in and you're hiring them to do a project or do some work.
Okay.
So we sometimes see in contracts inside our world work for hire clauses, and what that basically means is the business we're working with is trying to say that any product you deliver me, we own. And what we're saying is, no, that's not the case. We own the product, and you are essentially renting it from us.
Yeah,
that's kind of the way to look at it.
Okay, that's good. I just wanted to clear that up a bit because I've got you in specifically because of your I'm going to call it tech SaaS background, because we've got to have lots of different types of people in it. We've got the CEO of the hospice and lots of other different types. So we're going every range here. But what I want to know is, you mentioned the Isle of Wight. We know each other from the island. So we actually both currently live on the Isle of Wight, which is the south of England. And I'm going to say it's quite a closed mindset environment. So how do you go from a very closed mindset, and just to give some context, and I don't mean this offensively to islanders, but it's not unusual to meet someone on one side of the island that's never been to the other in their lifetime. So how do you go from a closed mindset to thinking, I'm going to go to Exeter, I'm going to go and become a CRO of I know you don't intend, maybe you didn't think CRO initially, but effectively you've gone to a huge company, but being part of a huge company as a CRO. Where does the mindset come from? How was that already in you, or did you develop it during universities, childhood, adulthood, whatever? Where did it come from, and what is it?
I think you have to look at these things objectively and say, okay, where did my journey begin, and where am I now? And part of it, I think, was in me just because, as a child, my parents went through a separation, like I think whatever percentage of people in the world are today, high now, yeah. And I was living with my mum, and my mum, my two sisters, and myself, and you go through that as a youngster, and I saw my mum working 3 jobs, and I was admiring what she was doing, and I was like, okay, well, you've got to work hard in whatever you do. Yeah. But what that didn't do is give me the mindset to transition into software and become a software executive and those things. But what it did, I think, from an early age, is it instilled in me looking at people around me to say, okay, if you want to do anything just to survive in today's world, you should work hard.
Yeah.
Then I went to college, actually, and I used to get the ferry off to go to college, and unintentionally, it wasn't designed for me to go there to expand my mindset. What happened is as Isle of Wight people will know, the mainlanders, right, or the people in the main part of England, they would, whether it's college and as we are every day, and I met a number of interesting people.
Yeah,
I think this is the link I'm making here. I think is one of the most important ones, one of the things I live by today, and that is when I went, I didn't just go to college to take an education. I went there to meet people who I could be in contact with, who would teach me something.
Yeah.
So essentially networking. At the time, networking wasn't such a big phrase and so talked about. But really what I did is I just surrounded myself with people who were intelligent and smart and everything else. And what I noticed is that I personally, having grown up on the west part of the Isle of Wight, went to an average school doing average things. For the first year of college, I literally ghosted through. I played a little bit of football, I did a few things, I didn't do fantastic.
Yeah.
And I was of the mindset, talking about mindset, I was on the mindset of, well, I'm going to college, so I'll naturally get a good job.
Yeah. Okay.
Which isn't true. No. And I think anyone out there will know that is fundamentally the adult me looks at the, adolescent me and the young and says, what the hell were you thinking? But what I did do is I met, and it's not my current wife, but the girlfriend I had at the time, and she was an insanely hard worker. And she basically sat me down one day and said, you need to pull your finger out. If you want to go to uni, you need to sort yourself out. And at the time I was like, well, do I want to go to uni? I didn't know and whatever, but I did, and I went. And I think that what I learned very quickly is that actually by just applying myself and working hard and changing from a narrow, I would, rather than saying call it closed, I'd probably call it a narrow mindset, where I was so focused on today and tomorrow, I wasn't thinking about what 30, 60, 90 even days look like, let alone 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah. So I think I flicked myself in those moments to say, okay, well, if I do go to uni, what do I want to do after that? And obviously then you go to uni, you meet great people. And then, but what happened is I went from the island in a small environment into a slightly broader network. Brockenhurst, college, exactly. Slightly wider, but still, not that broad. And then when I went to uni, the doors really opened, and I was lucky enough to live with 3 guys at uni, but 2 of them in particular I'm still in contact today. You've actually met both of them. They're 2 of my best men, my 2 best men, who insanely driven, like to work hard. But again, are we as the 3 of myself, Tom, Mark, are we the smartest people in the world? No. But do we all apply ourselves to everything? Yes.
The hard work. I mean, that's interesting because obviously even going to Brockenhurst is quite unusual for the Isle of Wight, actually. So they're probably, was you encouraged to do that, or did you decide to do it? Because obviously it might have been your parents.
I did it because I was... So I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to take a step back. I was lucky enough to get a fairly good mentor in my career, and his name's Sterling, and his wife Lynn, who again I know you've met. Both live in the US, and I worked with them. That was the Infodesk story that we went to sell the company. And he said something to me once, and it stuck with me forever. And he said, Sam, most successful, intelligent people are a bit different.
Yeah.
And And at the time, this was 4 or 5 years ago, I didn't really know what he meant, but today I fully understand. And what he meant by that was, it's okay to not be the same as everyone else. It's okay to like miss out on the odd party or to miss out on something if you're doing something that makes, that moves you and your life forward. Yeah. And I did go through those things, and that basically, I would say, is what kind of set it up for where we are today. And
yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, because it's not unusual to not. Like I said, I don't mean it in a negative way when I say closed. It's just you come. I was not from the Isle of Wight, but I see that, and what I saw in you is somebody who went outside of that, and then also probably lead on. You've gone a little bit, but you went effectively from Isle of Wight. You staged it, obviously, Brockenhurst University, so forth. But you've gone from, again, an Isle of Wight environment to a global environment. I know for the listeners that you've done a hell of a lot of work travel in the last 6 years, maybe more than 6 years. But I know you've done a lot. Yep. So what you've gone from is an environment that is very, very, doesn't go the other side or even particularly go to the mainland, as we call it, to suddenly you're traveling the world. So how do your mindset transition from that? Because I've struggled with this in the past. I've gone from being with a celebrity or a high-end earner or a billionaire to then the next day the run-of-the-mill average Joe who has no appetite to do any of that. So how have you dealt mindset-wise? And I say mindset because I think you do need to transition your mindset when going between two. How did you find that?
It's hard. But I think that's the first thing that anyone I coach or I work with, I say to them, if everything in this world was meant to be easy, then everyone would, there wouldn't be enough money to go around because everyone would do it. But by applying yourself appropriately, you can start to shift. So I would say I adopted more of I think you actually even talk about these, but like more of a growth mindset, right? So where before, as I think I mentioned this earlier, before when I was on the island, I was very happy and comfortable to go and play football on the weekend, to just meet my mates down the park or whatever, and that was and go to the pub, right? As I got older, and that was fine. But what I realised and what I noticed relatively quickly, and my wife Grace and I, and when we talk about this today, is I wanted more for my kids. I wanted to provide for. I now have 2 children, as you know, but at the time when it started, I didn't. But I knew that eventually I wanted to have children. I wanted to be able to provide something for them, so they became a little bit of my why, right? And I think when you can identify why you do something, you can shift your mindset a lot more easily. So at the beginning, my why was just because I was just a little bit ambitious, maybe. Like, there's a little bit in me that was curious. I think curiosity is also a big factor of what can make people successful, because if you want to know why, you're curious what else could be there or what more might look like, you may explore that, and then it's that exploration coupled with the hard work we talked about earlier that then opens doors. Does it keep you running once the door's open? No, but it opens the door. So to shift that, to go back to your question, in shifting that mindset, I think what I've learned to do is accept and be happy with the people I know and have here who don't maybe have the ambitions to travel the world and do those things. I found common ground with them in the things we do. Like, we enjoy talking about, I mentioned football. We enjoy talking about those things, but I don't sit there in front of them and talk to them about the big wide world or the 20 business meetings I've just been to. I've built a network, you included, that are also friends, but also have similar ambitions or understand the complex business world and environment that I've been in. So for me, that was one of my coping mechanisms, is I went through almost an exercise, and this has gone on over years. I mean, I've received messages on social media and things of, like, oh, look at you now, you think you're great because you've done this or you've done that, or you jump on a plane. And no, I don't. I just don't want myself or my wife to have to struggle through and have my kids have those challenges that we had as a family trying to grow up.
That's an interesting question, actually, because coming back from the mindset shifts, when people, especially in England, and obviously we can narrow it to the Isle of Wight, but as an English mentality as a whole now, when people do well, there is a lot that people that don't like that, and there's a lot of I don't know if the word is jealousy. I'm so sorry for those who might get offended with that. But the reality is it comes across as that. If someone's doing something really well, it doesn't mean they're super rich or whatever. But if they're doing really well at something, there's always people that want to be relatively negative. And I know from your background, because I know the area as well, that you will have that.
Yep.
So, I mean, we don't have to go into a specific scenario, but how do you actually deal with that? Because if we think about the people listening, there's going to be individuals there that do start to do things out of the norm of their friendship group. Maybe the same friendship group that were quite happy, like you said, about just living day to day, going week to week with no real other ambitions. So then when you start to say, hey, I want more, I'm going to go and do this, you then open yourselves up to negativity from ones who don't like that. So how do you deal with that?
I think you have to get to a point mentally where you can accept that if you want to make that change, the friends that were your friends, some of them will come on that journey with you and accept the new you, but others won't. And you have to accept the fact that the ones that won't will probably get left behind.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean they're left behind because you're better than them.
No.
That means they're left behind because you've moved to something new and they stayed in the present and what they're doing and they're happy to go. And I would say if you were to look at analyze my friendship groups from school to today, there is a couple of people that fit in one hand that have stayed consistent through that journey.
Yeah.
But the rest, if I pass them in the street, it's a friendly hello, but it's not, we're not close friends. And I think that you have to be very comfortable within yourself to know that if you want to take that step, there probably will be some of that. And then if you do that, the ones around you will support you when you get the negativity.
Yeah.
Because you can talk to them. They actually understand the mindset of where they are and what you're trying to become because they're willing to support you on that journey. So I said this earlier and I'll say it again because I got the question not too long ago when I was speaking to someone in a similar setup and they said to me, well, how did you achieve what you achieved? How are you in your first boardroom in your mid-20s? And I said to them, this might surprise you, but honestly, it's the people you surround yourself with.
Yeah.
And that also answers that question about mindset. Because if I surround myself, I know you personally, you've taken some, from people all the time because you're building your social presence and all these things. But you are happy for others in their success. And I'm happy for you when I see you and others be successful. But you have to be comfortable that there will be people who are not.
Yeah.
And when you see those messages, you've got two options. Right, well, you've got multiple, but in my head, I have two options.
Yeah.
The one is to read it, get caught up in it, and let it drag you, take a step back, or you can have it to propel you forward. And that is either, it depends on how your mind works, a screw you, I'm going to show you, or a I'm ignoring you and just going to continue with my day. Yeah. And I think that it's hard to be both, but I think that some people they use it as fuel, and some people use it as
whatever. Yeah. And there's a risk of becoming arrogant, of you to becoming arrogant, because I think sometimes if you take, again, you can take those two views where I'm not going to be bothered by you or stuff you, and again, some people can take that as arrogance. But I think you've explained it well. It's just being comfortable. Well, I agree with that. If you're going to go and do anything in business, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Or not just business. If you want to be a triathlete or elite marathon runner, they're all going to be tough. So I think the reality of what you said in terms of being comfortable, you're going to be in uncomfortable situations. And actually, that's not just business or fitness. That's people. Yeah. And I think that's a good point. And that's why I wanted to ask that, because I know it's stuff that you will come across. I remember being young in the boardroom at 25. I was a very young. I was in my first boardroom at 17, so you always then have negativity as well. When you're at a boardroom in your 20s, there is still some old school dinosaurs out there that don't like that.
I was told in my very first board meeting, sat there, well, what do you know? Right? What do you know at your age? And you do get imposter syndrome. You do. It's funny because I was talking to Grace about this last night, and you see all over socials now, like people who are successful and celebrating success and whatever. Yeah, it's great. Like I love seeing those things, but it's also very hard for just general people to cut through what's real and what's not. Yeah. And but what I think is also important is that there is a reality to everybody and every human being that it isn't a breeze. You're not just successful overnight. And I think you posted this the other day, but it resonated with me where you were basically saying about, everyone wants the success.
Oh yes.
But there's a journey, right?
And don't envy the journey to success. They can become jealous or envious towards that part, but not this bit.
Yeah. But the reality is that bit is the bit that defines the people up here and the people that stay down here, right at the bottom of the.
I think, and I think this is why we created the Grit and Growth project, because mindset is, in my opinion anyway, one of the key fundamentals of being successful. Because you can be the cleverest person in the room, but if you've got poor mental fitness, you ain't going anywhere. Yeah. You could be the fittest person or the fastest person on the track, but you ain't got the right mindset, you ain't winning. So I think that's why we talk about this a lot, and that's why those bits you said of the negativity you do receive from going from, just a norm to just trying to do something a bit more. It doesn't, like I said, I'm not talking just to trillionaires in these podcasts. It's about real, genuine, successful people. And I think the problem with social medias is it's great for people like me in terms of I get a lot of business from social media, but people only want to post the good. And actually, I don't know if you ever did it, but you did a family trip to America or New York a while ago.
Yep.
And I remember you talking about, and hopefully you don't mind me talk about this, but I'm going to bring it up now because it's come to my head. The video that Grace or you shared looked amazing.
Yep.
But the reality was you've got two young children and it's an absolute shit show at times. And people only want to see the nice part. They wouldn't watch it if it's like, oh, how hard it is being a mum and dad on
if it was just me being negative for the entire... Yeah.
And that's it. And then I think, so when you talk about being comfortable with that, and there might not be an answer to this, Sam, so apologies if there isn't, but is there ways or things you can do to just be comfortable when you're having those moments where you think, okay, this person's overwhelming me, or my son or whatever it is overwhelming me, in business or negativity or whatever? Is there things you do personally that are able to help you manage your emotions and your mindset at that moment, at that time?
My wife would say no, but I will tell you what I do.
You'll argue that point.
Yeah. And my argument to that point would be, I found a few things that enable me to change my mind from the overwhelming stimulation and the moment I'm in, whether that's business and just tons of things going through my head, or that's my kids running around, I need a 5-second break. Yeah. And I've had to learn those as I've grown. But the thing that triggered me to learn them was the fact that a couple of years ago, probably 3-4 years ago, I was getting to the point where I felt like I was burning out.
Yeah.
And I mean, I did 55 flights in a calendar year, traveling on business. I was in Japan for a couple of days and then in San Francisco, and I was all over the place. And you mentioned that in the trip with my kids in New York. And yeah, I mean,
probably the same year.
It was, I think it was. Yeah, it was great. There were so many great elements of it.
Yeah.
But the reality is 50% was great, 50% was terrible, right? And that was them whinging, having meltdowns. So what I've done is, my wife's quite a big reader. She reads a lot of fictional books.
Okay.
And I was only reading business books.
Yeah.
And that's great.
Yeah.
But when you're always in business mode, when you're then picking up a book in the evening and it's about business...
Yeah,
I did that because it's what I thought I was supposed to do to be successful. Because you see all those people posting about business books, and I realised my mind was never switching off.
Yeah.
So I've adapted to a couple of things. One, I have just general exercise of some form. So if time permits, it will be, okay, today's been stressful or this moment's been stressful. I'm going to go for a walk, a run, a cycle, whatever is necessary. Go to the gym, whatever that is. It's not always possible, right? Sometimes you just need a 5-second break. So the other thing I do is, and I've been teaching my my daughter and my son this for moments like young kids struggle to get their emotion, control their emotions.
Especially for you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so someone taught me this when I was a kid, and I had a little bit of counselling when I was a child, and they taught me just to literally take a moment, take a real deep breath in and blow out as hard as possible. Breath work, essentially, is what it would be called today. And my son, as you know, Seb, he's nearly 3, and he at the moment is in that control the emotion. And now I said to him, remember what we do? And he just goes, And can he do it properly? No. But can I see his frustration turn into a smile?
Yeah.
50, 60% of the time?
Yeah.
So when you weigh that up and you say, okay, well, that's better than zero.
Zero, yeah.
And that's something I've used. But then also back to the reading point is, and the last thing I've done, so there's three things. It's kind of short-term bursts is breathing.
Yeah.
The second, which again is one of those cliche things, but I found a style that worked for me, is exercise. And I honestly believe you can only be fit in the mind if you're moderately fit, right? And healthy, yeah?
Yeah.
In your body. And then the third thing is reading. And reading, I use that as a decompressor to stop my mind feeling. And I just read fiction, crime fiction, thrillers, and
that's an interesting, because like you said, a lot of people now, again, maybe sometimes fake stuff on Instagrams and whatever, they're on about books you should read, and it's always self-development.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I read a lot of self-development, but that's a good point for me, really. I've not read a fictional book for a while. I mean, the closest I get is biographies, because sometimes they're fictional.
Yeah.
Maybe not technically, but sounds like it. But that's a really good point, actually, because if you're an entrepreneur or solopreneur and you're always in work mode, most of us read. I don't know many successful people that don't read, because actually I think we all realise that you do learn. Even from a fiction book, if you learn one thing from a whole book, then it's still learning.
Yeah. And
it might not even be learning from that book. It's just that moment of focus onto that book where something that you couldn't think of because you were so stressed.
Yeah. The mind is so much more free when you come back from that decompressing moment.
That's a good point, the fictional book. I didn't think about that.
Yeah. I just say, honestly, I'll tell you where I was in Southampton, South Coast UK, with Grace, and she was hovering around Waterstones, like, I'm going to buy some books. And I said, oh, no. And she said, I'm going to get you a fictional book. And I said, don't do that. It's a waste of money. She said, just trust me. And she went in, she asked the guy there, I still remember the gentleman, to the day I die, I need to get my husband to read a fictional book. It needs to be super easy. Otherwise, he's going to give it one shot and that's it. Because she knows my personality. That's it. I'm done. And I'll go back to the business books. And she did. And it was called Flicker in the Dark. And Stacey Williamson, I think her name is. And fairly short, super simple to read. Is it the best book in the world? No, but it was super easy, super simple. I could switch my mind off. And I've read her follow-up since, and I've been really on it. Like,
that's a good tip, because all of us. I mean, I've got asked this morning about the books I think people should read, and even then, I only listed self-development books,
because they are the ones you should read to keep developing. But the problem is a mind cannot develop if it's overwhelmed.
It's constant.
So if you need to, and books may not be from like podcasts, like simple things like the Peter Crouch podcast, right? There are, and I listen to lots of business podcasts, and I come on them, but at the same time, you need things that are away from your mind just running at 100 miles an hour.
Talk about exercise, and I was talking to a guest recently about stress in the business place, and we talked about meditation, affirmations, visualizations. So what's your view on those three things? Because a lot of successful people now will always talk about meditation, affirmations, visualizations, and there's no wrong or right, but what's your view on this?
So when I was at uni, I did sports science, and one of the things we did is we talked about peak performance, right, in sport, which is different, but there are some elements of mindset that are similar. Yeah, and one of the things we talked about was, and we saw case studies on, were some top athletes like football players, rugby players, runners, and how they would do visualization work and some of those things in, taking a free kick in football.
Yeah.
So I learned a reasonable amount about some of these techniques, and I really like them. Generally speaking, I think meditation is probably, for me, the thing that would be the most successful personally. I do use it occasionally, but I wouldn't say I use it as effectively as I should. It's actually on my 2024 list of things to implement more of. So who knows, in a year, if I sit with you again, then maybe we'll be doing it more. But my general view is, I think that every human being is different. Lots of people preach that you have to do this one thing and this one thing and this one thing. But in reality, there is a scope or a scale of useful pieces. Yeah. And it's finding where you fit on that scale and using those things to your benefit. And I think if you do that, things like affirmation, visualization, and meditation can be superb. But I think they're a great way to just, again, change your mind from go mode to switching into it.
And you mentioned exercise, and in my opinion, is that can be a form of meditation anyway. I love listening to podcasts, so my brain is always wired. It is constant. I will wake up at 2 a.m. thinking of things that I don't need to think about. So I have to understand techniques to switch off, because otherwise I will never switch off. So for me, the non-business podcast goes into my ears when I'm working out, and that's my form of meditation. I'm actually just working out, releasing endorphins, dopamine, and etc. And then I've got my non-business related podcast that's normally about nonsense or football or stuff like that. Peter Crouch podcast is probably my go-to as well. And if I've listened to that, whatever else is going on. So yeah, I think that's important for people to understand. You made a good point. Well, lots of influencers now like to tell you do this every day, you will be successful. It's a load of nonsense, because if that's not the way it works for you, it's not going to work.
You just got to find, there's so much great advice out there. It's about finding the balance that works for you as an individual, isn't it? And you do need people around you, mentors. You need to find people that inspire you, and you want to aspire to be like one day in some way, shape or form, but accepting that you can't be a carbon copy of that exact personal situation. So
I think you've probably covered it, but I mean, if you think about the SaaS world or the sales and CRO and 55 flights a year, etc., you're working in an incredibly fast-paced environment. I know you took a step off of that conveyor belt right now, but how do you still cultivate this mindset of innovation? Because to stay successful, for a business to stay successful, and if you're the CRO of that business, you've got to constantly, or your job should be anyway, to constantly cultivate, a mindset of innovation, rather than just a bunch of sheep that are going to just do the same thing day in, day out, and you don't develop. So how do you cultivate that in an fast-paced environment?
There's a really, really, really great... So part of your question is about working with people and getting them to innovate, and also myself to be innovative. There's a really great study that was done, and I think it was to do with Google, and I can't remember the lady's name who did the study, but if you or any listener was to Google psychological safety, it's a concept that's done a number of years ago, and basically it's about fostering the right environment in a team to enable that team and individuals to be comfortable, to be able to speak openly. And they basically analysed a group of high-performing teams, a group of teams, and the highest-performing teams consistently had this concept of psychological safety. So they felt safe enough to challenge their managers and their peers' thoughts. They felt comfortable to sit in a room and have open conversation, whereas the moderate to lower-performing teams didn't feel psychologically safe. So the reason I mention this is because it's linked to your question. Is what I've tried to do just generally in all the groups I've led, even if I'm coaching, if I'm sat down with someone, is to enable people to know that it's okay to ask a question, it's okay to challenge the thinking, it's okay to not always agree. But in doing those things, what happens typically, you breed innovative ideas. Because you hear things that you wouldn't otherwise. If you were just to sit there and say, no, we're doing it this way, this is the only way we're going to do it, you shut down all innovation in a way. The only innovation you have is your own innovation. So to make me be more innovative in the way I keep my mindset fresh, the way I think about problems, and I solve those problems, is I try to, in every environment, whether that's personally and professionally, create something that's psychologically safe, where people can challenge the way that's thought. And challenge doesn't mean being rude and disagreeing all the time.
No.
It just means it's okay to say, well, why would you?
Why don't we do it this way?
Why would we not think about it like this? Or have you thought about the repercussions if we do it this way? And I might sit there and go, well, yes, I have. No, there's a third repercussion here. And then I would say, okay, well, what is it? And then we have a conversation and we innovate together to solve the problem from a different angle. And there's the current CEO of Infodesk, which is the company that we sold to that private equity firm, to a private equity firm based in California, Quadria. He implemented this across the leadership team at Infodesk, and it was a really super kind of successful thing. But I've adopted that just generally in day to day, and I think that enables people to keep a mindset of innovative mindset, because I'm never looking at things like this is my way and this is the only way.
Yeah.
I'm always looking open and say, okay, well, what ideas can people bring?
So what do you do then if you do it that way and they're not, you're trying, without you making the decisions, you're trying to encourage innovative solutions and you're just not getting them? Do you then have to go into more the dictatorial leadership, or do you still keep going until it works?
I think it's about making sure everyone understands that ultimately, if you're the CEO or the CRO or you're whatever you're running, you own the business or you run the business, you're ultimately accountable.
Yeah.
And I think it's, as long as everyone in the room has respect and trust in one another and understands that you as the person running the group or the organization is ultimately accountable, they will understand that a decision will still have to get made. Because we have to also remember in these situations that this is not, by creating a psychologically safe environment, this is not me saying the decision is everyone's to make.
Yeah.
This is me saying this is a forum where anyone can challenge the idea and the decision. The decision is the decision, right? So we will still make a decision and move forward, but it's okay to challenge. And that's why it's also okay not to agree. Yeah. But it doesn't mean by not agreeing that we're going to fight about it or we hate each other or any of those situations. It's just more the fact that you can foster an environment where you typically get better outcomes, but you have to as the leader. And I think this is the difference between successful, great leadership and other leaders, let's call them, without being derogatory to other leaders, but other leaders where they either create an environment that's maybe not psychologically safe, so it's all about them and their own way and doing their things their way, or they create an environment the complete opposite end of the scale where it's so psychologically safe, but there's no clear leader. Yeah. Right? As in there's no one that's going to make a decision. And I think that is the most important thing, is if you're going to adopt psychological safety into your leadership practice and styles and the way you think, you have to not lose the awareness of your accountability to the company to make the decisions to move the business forward.
That makes sense. I was going to come on to leadership. You already answered that, so that's good. I mean, I've only got a couple more questions to throw at you, really. If you were, and you sort of covered this actually briefly, but if you were speaking to another individual that comes from a traditionally closed mindset environment, what would be your 3 things you would just say to them to help you get out of that, what you should do? And I know we've talked about a lot of this, but if it was going to be a straightforward, just like, hey, look, this is how you can get yourself out of this closed mindset, what does the key 3 things you do?
The first thing I would say is spend a bit of time not saying no to things that may scare you a bit.
Yeah.
And I don't mean jump in a cage with a tiger. I mean, I'm not going to apply for that because maybe I don't reach the skill set, or just give it a bit of a go, because what's the worst that can happen? And typically the worst that can happen is, you don't get it or you fail at it.
And just say no, yeah.
But in that failure, and this is the second piece, is learn from failure and don't let failure define you.
Yeah.
So, and what I mean by that in its simplest form is, when you don't do something well, or if you start a business and it fails, or whatever it is, take everything you can, absorb it as much as possible, and if you can take 1 or 2 or 3 things you've not done well and critically reflect and ask others what went wrong. Don't just rely on yourself.
And actually learn from it.
Yeah, learn, do it. You might still make mistakes. You might still fail. I don't know how many average times an entrepreneur has to start a business, but it's probably like 4, 5, 6 times.
You lose a lot.
Yeah,
before you.
But if you learn, so for me, it's that willing to take risks, open the door and see what's behind it.
Yeah.
If you fail at it, it's okay. Be comfortable, knowing. And then the third thing for me is, and I really, really, truly believe this now, almost to the point I'm probably preaching it and people around me get sick of it, but it's your network.
Yeah.
I hate the saying and I hate cliche sayings, but network is your net worth. But to be honest, it is so true. And communities and network-related businesses now are starting to become some of the fastest growing and most successful out there.
Yeah.
Outside of industries like software, which are going crazy. And what we find is even now, like I follow some really inspirational salespeople on LinkedIn, and there's one young lady called Holly, and I stumbled across her account because of actually her sister Sophie tried to recruit. We were kind of in discussions about recruiting for a business I was running at the time, and Sophie liked her post, how the algorithms work, and her sister is basically a sales rep essentially. And she is, really inspirational. And a lot of her leads and inbound stuff comes from her LinkedIn network because she is now social selling.
Yeah.
So if you think about social selling, it's a big part about network.
Now it is. Yeah.
So if you go back to that question about what would be the third thing I would say is network. Yeah. If someone says, and I mentor a relatively youngish person at the moment, he's 17, and he said to me, my dad wanted to go up the pub with his mates, and I was going to go with him, but I don't want to sit there. I'm 17. I can only have a Coke. And I was like, yeah, but who are his mates?
Yeah.
And he was like, well, one of them runs this business. I said, well, go meet them, chat to them, right? And am I saying you have to go there and work with them every day? No. But just get to know them, learn from them, absorb. And by meeting them, if you ever need something in the future, there may be a little door that's slightly ajar that before would have been closed. Yeah. And then by seeing that little bit of light, you're more bigger probability of pushing that door wide open to walk.
100%.
So I think that networking, that's what I'm talking about, social I'm not talking about social media and things, but I talked about social selling. I talked about, go down the pub and meet your friend or your friend's friend or whatever that may be.
Computer every day.
But just meet people, join groups, communities, because that, in my eyes, you're investing in yourself. You're not just investing in the community that you're investing in.
And so, okay, that makes sense. And then the final thing, I mean, You've obviously been in a very fast-paced environment for quite some years. So you mentioned you've become an advisor for Infodesk instead. So what's next? For you,
what's next? That's a great question. So I own a consulting business, and we do some consulting with companies, like advising them on different things, as you well know. I'm doing some investment stuff, so we're investing in businesses. I'm doing some stuff with you, as you know. And what's next for me is, at the start of every year, I set myself some objectives.
Yeah.
And my objective for 2024, my primary one was to be more present with my family.
Yeah.
Having traveled so much recently, it was important for me that I'm there. And like my dad, he lived on the mainland pretty much my whole childhood, now lives in the island, super close relationship with him. He's a super inspiration for me. But it was to be more present with him, with my kids, with my mum and everyone. So that for me is the short term, what's next for the rest of 24. But I'm one of those people who can't just sit still and that for me isn't enough. So I'm enjoying coaching. I'm enjoying some advisory gigs at the moment with some software businesses and smaller scale ups outside of software and services. But I am working on, I've just co-founded the software company. So that's just launched recently. So I'm dabbling in the world of investments and startup, scale-up type of software businesses and trying to get them to market and grow them into what we did at Infodesk. We went from a very low figure couple of $1 million turnover into a multi-million-dollar turnover, like revenue, plus a very, very big multi-million-dollar exit. So we want to try and repeat that again. Can I do that 1, 2, or 3 more times?
That sounds ideal.
That's
so
the thing.
Final question, and I ask everyone on this podcast, is your definition of success, because everyone's is different. So I like to understand what your definition of success is.
I think the young me would have said money and a title, a job title. The more mature, I'm not going to say, because people will probably know me will say you're not mature. The more mature me would say my definition of success is feeling fulfilled in what I'm doing, with the objective to strive for the next piece. So for example, like fulfillment for me right now is, as I say, about family.
About being present,
and being present with the family. But also knowing that I don't feel fulfilled if I'm not learning.
Yeah.
So I know that reading and speaking to interesting people and challenging myself in business, it also gives me fulfillment. So success for me is that fulfillment, and that can be creating that $100 million business, but it also can be being present with my family. And the true definition of success is taking those two things and being able to do them both.
Trying to do both at the same time.
Yeah. That's how I would define success.
Well, if people want to get hold of you, Sam, how do they find you?
LinkedIn, I'm actually under Samuel Fryer. You'll find me. You can search Infodesk or any of the other businesses. And then on there's all my contact details.
Well, we'll share all your details anyway as part of the podcast. But thanks for your time. Super appreciate it. And hopefully you guys get tons of information out of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.